Whether you're making a bag or sewing a garment, you're going to need to at some point do some kind of easing to get bulky amounts of fabric into a smaller space. There are many different ways of doing this: pleating, box pleating, and gathering. In this video, I'm going to focus on gathering. In garment construction, gathering is mostly used to increase volume to an area, such as a lovely ball gown skirt or bell sleeves. However, in bag construction, it can oftentimes be decorative and functional. From a decorative perspective, gathering and bag making can actually add a lot of dynamic to an otherwise plain fabric. The way that the light hits the bag is going to be changed simply by having the gathers, because it's going to distribute a lot more of the highlights and the shadows in a very interesting pattern. Functional gathering is more or less what you get when you add elastic to a seam line. The best example I can give is a diaper bag with side pockets that have the elastic along the top. That kind of gathering is functional because you still have access to the pocket, but it's also hugging that pocket closer to the side of the bag so that it doesn't stick out. Because, you know, if it's sticking out like that, squirrels are gonna just hide their nuts in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna show you two different ways to gather fabric. The first way is gonna be a lot more decorative. You're not really gonna have any stretch on that kind of seam line, but it will give you a really beautiful look. The second is going to be more functional, which is going to include elastic. For the first type of gathering, what we're going to do is basically create two lines of basting stitches along the top edge of the seam. We need to stitch these lines within the seam allowance. That's so it doesn't show up on the other side of the fabric after it's been stitched to the main seam. If you do happen to spill over, it's okay, they can be easily removed. There are just two things that you need to do to your sewing machine to get prepared for doing a gather, because you need basting stitches, which is basically a really long, loose stitch that's only meant to hold things in place temporarily. We need to adjust our sewing machine to make basting stitches. We'll first increase our stitch length to the highest you can make it. My machine's highest is 6 millimeters. Next, we will turn our tension down somewhere between a half and a whole turn. You don't want to go too far, but you also don't want to do too little. To start, move your thread tails to the back of the machine and pull so that you have extra long tails. Loose tension and long stitches will cause a little bit of natural gathering to occur, so you don't want to lose the thread tails during that process. When you start stitching, hold the thread tails in the back with your left hand. Then lightly hold the fabric from the front side to keep the natural gathering to a minimum. This will make it easier to put in the second line of basting. Finish the first seam, then pinch the end while pulling it free from the machine. Pull further away to have long tails on the end of this seam as well. Now repeat all of that for the second line of basting, keeping it just next to the first line, but not letting the stitches overlap. To create the gathers, grab the loose bobbin threads on one side of the seams and gently pull on them to slide the fabric down. Do this a little on each side at a time so that it's easier to distribute the gathers. Be careful not to pull too hard or you may rip out the basting stitches. Secure the gathers by placing pins on either end and wrapping the loose threads, both upper and lower, around the pin. If you don't want to use pins, you can also just knot the stitches close to the fabric's edge. Once secured, you can use your fingers to evenly distribute the gathers between the pins. This is where the two lines of basting are important. They help create a much more even distribution of gathers than a single line ever would. Now, a secondary technique to doing the two lines of gathering is to zigzag over a piece of yarn and then pull the fabric along the yarn to create the gathers. The reason that I like this method more with the two lines of basting stitches is because I feel like they're going to be more secure and they're not going to slide around on me while I'm trying to attach it to a main piece of fabric. Not to mention you have to have impeccable eyesight and aim so that you don't accidentally zigzag into the yarn and thus screw up the possibility of gathering anything. For the second technique, we'll use elastic to create the gathers. The elastic is placed inside a channel that's created from fabric and secured on either end. In order for this to work, you'll need a piece of elastic that is smaller than the edge you'll be gathering. Always test the elastic to make sure it can easily stretch all the way across the area to gather. To keep things nice and simple for the demo, we're going to gather the topmost edge. I'm going to use a temporary ink pen to draw some reference lines. You don't want to simply fold over the edge twice, as this will create a lot of bulk. Instead, you only want to turn under 1/4 inch of fabric, then fold that down so that it's only a little taller than the elastic's width. If it's too tight, it will be too hard to pull the elastic through later. The first line is the 1/4 inch hem, the second line is what will become the top edge, and the third line is where the hem should line up. Note, you don't have to gather an edge. You can also make the channel with single fold bias tape or a strip of matching fabric with the raw edges turned under. Regardless of which method you choose, give the folds a good press with an iron on the correct settings for your fabric. If you're using a thicker vinyl or leather, make sure you have good health coverage, because you're going to have a heart attack trying to gather it. And just while we're in a close-up, here you can see the channel and how little bulk there is thanks to turning under one of the edges half as much as the channel's height. We're going to sew the channel in place on the hem side, right along that smaller fold. Sew across the full length of the channel using your foot as a guide to stay right along the fold's edge. Also, I'm using a top stitch length of 3 millimeters here since it isn't a load-bearing construction stitch. I recorded the statement no less than 5 times because words. The trick to getting the elastic through the tiny channel isn't to go buy some $30 plastic gadget to yank it through. All you actually have to do is hook a safety pin to one end of the elastic and nudge it through the channel. Make sure to pin the other end of the elastic down to the opening so you don't lose it in the channel like I did. If you do happen to lose it, like I did, you could grab some tweezers and tug it back out, then secure it before inchworming your way through. When you get to the other side, please pin that end down as well. You can also sew across the channel openings to keep the elastic from getting lost, like mine. Finally, grab each end of the elastic and give it a little tug to distribute the gathers along the channel. The only downside to doing the elastic channel technique is if you don't have the correct kind of elastic with a non-roll property on it, then you kind of run the risk of it twisting and turning even when it's been attached at the side seams. That can make the top of your pocket look pretty darn funny. One way to avoid it is just take a lightning or zigzag stitch and stitch across it while it's stretched out to tack down that elastic. Of course, then the downside to that is you don't really have that nice channeled look, and you might as well have just zigzagged the elastic on anyway. Of course, if you're like me and you have a million machines that do one thing really well and nothing else, you could use your serger to put the elastic on and then fold it over. If the gathering is going to be a design choice for aesthetics, you could also experiment with gathering the bottom edge too, and then having it pull on both ends. It will look really darn cool. Do you have any other techniques that you've employed for getting gathering into any of your garments or bags or other sewing projects? Leave it down in the comment section below. I always love seeing how other people accomplish the same thing, but in different ways. As always, happy sewing and thank you.